Only millions of pedophiles could justify a demand of millions of child exploitation material, videos, and so forth. The first person you see arrested in the movie is a real person.
I'm willing to fund your project under one condition. We're going to have a party in about a week. You're going to bring all your existing inventory. If I'm happy with what I see, I'll fund your resort. We had to get him to bring all of their children to one place at one time so we could rest.
It's kind of like they want to sacrifice you. And I said, whoa, it sort of blew my mind that he said that. I said, what do you mean? He said,
That's insane.
Yeah, that's crazy.
That's
unsustainable, man. That is unsustainable. How do you sustain an industry like that?
Hollywood has always carried a second face, one that doesn't appear under flashing cameras or acceptance speeches, but lingers just beyond the spotlight, where influence, reputation, and quiet alliances intersect in ways few ever fully see. And every once in a while, something slips through that carefully managed surface, not as a loud revelation, but as a slow, unsettling shift that makes people pause and reconsider everything they thought they understood about the industry.
Most of the traffickers were trafficked themselves as children, and most of the perpetrators were victims themselves as children. Now, don't get me wrong in saying this. You know, some people get all pissed thinking, oh, Paul's a sympathizer. No, I have literally put my life in danger hundreds of times to ensure that they never hurt innocents again.
Were you actually on these undercover?
Yeah, I led or played a key part in over 70 missions, and we can go into the pit of darkness and talk about that. So I have been there. I have seen the darkest part of humanity, but I realized that the only way to fix this problem is to figure out how to heal humanity, because it's generational trauma. It is literally hundreds of millions of perpetrators in our neighborhoods. That somebody doesn't just go down to Colombia and go try to, have sex with a child. It's likely already been going on in their own families and their own neighborhoods, and now they're expanding beyond that. And so we need to ask ourselves, do we just take everybody who's dealt with trauma and put them away? No, because the majority of them become protectors. What we need to do is have systems that in their adolescent years and their young adult years, whatever, that we can help them talk about it, we can help them release it so that it never, ever gets to the point where they're passing on that trauma to a child.
But how do you identify, if this is going on so pervasively, how do you identify, like you said, one out of, in a neighborhood, there's so many places this could be taking place. How do you identify it? And is it mostly the fathers abusing the children?
It's over 90% of a child is familial. It's a father, it's an uncle, it's a grandfather, or familial includes people that the family knows and trusts, right? And that's where even more trauma is. When we did the undercover work and we pulled these children out of hell, we knew they were being traumatized, and we can immediately get them the help, the loving, the healing that they need. What happens here in the U.S. is, a little girl is being her trusted, loving guardians, her father, her uncle, her neighbor, whatever else, and then is told, keep this secret, don't tell anybody, and then it gets buried. And her entire life, she's holding on to this trauma. Or even the boys, it's even worse with the boys because very few of us as men ever talk about it. We're like, oh, that thing that happened when I was 8 by my uncle, if I talk about that, that's going to make me less of a man. No, it won't. You were 8. That was a horrible thing that happened.
That's where this story begins, at the intersection of Mel Gibson, Oprah Winfrey, and a film that seemed to arrive with far more weight than anyone expected. Sound of Freedom, a movie that didn't just tell a story, but ignited a reaction, one that felt unusually intense, unusually divided, and to some observers, unusually revealing. Because while Gibson, long positioned on the fringes of Hollywood after years of public controversy, has reportedly voiced concerns and made claims that challenge the integrity of powerful figures, those statements exist in a space filled with speculation, interpretation, and unanswered questions. And yet the timing feels difficult to ignore. Why now, some people quietly wonder. And why does it seem to connect with a film that struck such a deep chord with audiences?
Let's talk about what's happening with Harvey Weinstein. I know you posted on Facebook already, but you haven't kind of spoken yet publicly about what's going on.
I think that this is, I'm always trying to look for the rainbow in the cloud, whatever is the silver lining. And this is what I do know for sure. When something this major happens, when you have the fallout, 50 women coming forward, that it's a watershed moment. And what I do believe is actually happening is that, first of all, it's triggering a lot of unreleased pain, repressed anger, guilt, and suffering that a lot of women have had. I happened to be on set with several actresses the other day, and we were filming some things, and they were like, hadn't slept over a period of 2 or 3 days, and I was like, what is that? I said, oh, you guys are suffering from PTSD.
And when you start talking about it out loud too,
everybody has a story. Everybody has a story. And so I think this is a watershed moment. And if we make this just about Harvey Weinstein, then we will have lost this moment. I think this is a moment where no matter what business you work in, there have been women who not only had the disease to please, that's a part of it, but who felt that in order to keep my job, in order to keep my position, in order to keep moving forward, I've got to smile, I've got to look the other way, I got to pretend he didn't say that, I got to pretend he didn't touch me. I think those days are about to be over.
And if it happens to you back in the day, you would say, sometimes you're not even aware what he just said wasn't really inappropriate.
I know you've had a couple moments.
Where you just think, what did he just say?
Yes, I remember Gail had a moment when she came and said to me what somebody said to her was so inappropriate. I was like, oh my God, you can sue over that. But
no, and all I said was, what did you say? And then they repeated it.
Yes.
It's terrible. I just sat there typing with my 20-something-year-old.
Pretend you didn't hear it.
Yes.
You pretend it's okay. You pretend you didn't.
No, it isn't. You're right, Jeff. Absolutely, you're absolutely right.
But a lot of women have been silenced, and I know
but I think it's going to change.
Being a victim of child, that when you feel like you cannot be heard, and then other people start speaking out, it makes you feel like, oh, now I can speak out too.
Yeah. So, and you've been speaking about it for years.
Yeah.
That question alone has kept conversations alive far longer than most expected. To understand why this moment feels different, you have to look at what Sound of Freedom actually became. Released in 2023 by Angel Studios, starring Jim Caviezel, and inspired by the real-life work of Tim Ballard, the film bypassed traditional systems and still managed to dominate attention. Competing against a major franchise release, it surged past expectations, pulling in over $250 million worldwide on a modest $14 million budget. Numbers that didn't just impress, they disrupted assumptions about what audiences truly respond to.
It's like for the longest time now, people in Hollywood, talent in Hollywood who don't agree with all this bull, they've had to sit in silence, right? They've had to sit with the threat of them not never working again if they say the wrong thing or back the wrong person or whatever. So yeah, this industry kind of crushed itself, man. And if you're on the outside looking in, if you're a filmmaker from any other country, Hollywood doesn't have the shine it used to have. Right? If I'm another country, I'm thinking, hey, we could start our own Hollywood. We could start making our own movies, right?
Well, here's some more.
And I think a lot of them are.
Here's a little bit more, and then I've got another clip.
Mainly, I'll give you an example. I wanted to shoot for a day in Los Angeles to do a reshoot on a film that I'd done, which I had to shoot in Vegas because that was more cost effective. And the tax incentives there weren't even that great. I would think like 15% or something, but it was still easier and more cost effective to shoot in Nevada. But I had to do a reshoot on there, and I thought, well, it's only a day shoot. I'll pick it up here in Los Angeles. And it was cheaper, more cost-effective to fly the entire American crew, buy them air tickets, fly them to Bulgaria, house them, feed them for 3 days, and do the shooting there for 3 days rather than to just shoot for one day locally in Los Angeles where they all lived.
Yep.
That's insane.
Yeah, that's crazy.
That's unsustainable, man. That is unsustainable. How do you sustain an industry like that? You don't.
You did.
That's crazy.
Aren't they saying that's what happened with the budget on One Battle After Another too? That he filmed over there, and basically that's why it was like sky high. I had heard some statements of people guessing that was the case at least, and it wouldn't surprise me because the budget was super high on it. So
there was a clip of Rob Lowe. He did a game show, and it was cheaper to not shoot it in Los Angeles on a soundstage, but fly the cast, the crew, and the contestants to Ireland and shoot it there.
I mean, that's the real problem with the industry.
And perhaps even more telling than its success was the energy behind it. Grassroots, persistent, and deeply personal. But what truly shifted the tone wasn't the box office, it was the response. Instead of unified praise for highlighting a difficult subject, parts of the media landscape reacted with skepticism, dismissal, and at times, open ridicule. That contrast created a new layer to the story, one that felt less about the film itself and more about the conversation surrounding it. Because when a message resonates this strongly with the public, yet receives such a divided reception from influential voices, it doesn't just raise eyebrows, it quietly invites a deeper question. What exactly is being challenged here, and why does it seem to make certain circles so uncomfortable to engage with it directly? By the time Mel Gibson began speaking more openly, his position within Hollywood had already shifted into something far less predictable. No longer fully inside the system, yet not entirely outside of it either, existing in that uneasy space where distance can sometimes change what a person is willing to say. Following the turbulence of the mid-2000s, when his reputation took a visible hit and doors that once opened effortlessly began to close, Gibson's perspective appeared to evolve in ways that caught people off guard. And whether that shift came from personal reflection, private experiences, or something he claims to have observed firsthand, one thing became increasingly clear. His tone toward the industry had sharpened, and his words began to carry a different kind of weight. But what's more intriguing is not just what he said, but how selectively those statements seemed to surface, almost as if they were surfacing at moments designed to provoke a reaction rather than simply inform.
And I want to start out with, I want to ask you one question about Epstein that everybody wants to know. Do you ever think that we will get the files really released, unredacted, the real files, everything that supposedly exists on Epstein?
No.
Okay.
Absolutely not. You know why? Here's the thing.
I assume.
Here's the thing. If you were an entity, I won't say if it's a 3-letter entity or if it's a ancient family entity, whatever. If you're an entity that wanted full control, you wanted to control the votes of a senator, of a congressman, of a judge, or you wanted to control the money of a billionaire, or you wanted to control some royalty. If you wanted that level of control, you get them on film with a 12-year-old. You control them forever. You really do. And that's really what it's about. It's about the CIA's book of dirty tricks has blackmail written all over it. That's really what the whole program was about from the beginning. And if we think that even our 3-letter agencies are the ones that are in control, we have another thing coming. There are families, there are institutions that are incredibly powerful that have to implement a certain level of control when you get to a place of power. And that is one method that is used. It's something that's used within Hollywood. We see it all over the place with guys who are wanting to be big stars and whatnot. If they can get you at a party, they can get you on film, they can put some level of blackmail on you. Now they can pour the money and the fame and everything else and have you rise to the tops of the tops. And people say you sold your soul to the devil. So that's true in many cases. It's exactly what happens. Is you see it in gangs where you have to prove your loyalty and you have to do something that now they have that control. It's so that when they raise you up the ranks, they have that blackmail on you. And that's what this whole story is about from the beginning.
But Paul, how could these people in power and authority be so ignorant as not to believe that maybe Epstein had a plot here, or he was filming them, or he was blackmailing them? How could they be so naive?
It was not naive. A lot of them trade their lust for power and money in exchange for us, right? You can have that stuff on me because I know that you're going to give me what I want.
Wow. Really?
Yeah, I've seen it.
I mean, to me, that's a real sign of weakness. I mean, you can't get that on your own. You have to rely on somebody else to provide that for you and take a risk like that. Wow.
Yeah. Well, and here's the thing too. There was a lot of guys at the Diddy parties, and they knew they were being filmed. They knew it. Going into the parties, they knew they were being filmed.
So they had that much confidence in Diddy that he would never do something like that?
It's a trade-off, knowing that kind of power, that kind of money, etc., can get me what I want. It happens a lot.
And for 20 years, a guy like Diddy and Epstein can do all of this disgusting stuff, as far as I'm concerned, with minors and get away with it. Nobody investigating them, nobody looking at it. Is that because people in power keep everybody else away? Is that the bottom line?
Well, here's the sad thing, Michael, is this is more pervasive than people, this meaning doing things with minors, right, is more pervasive than any of us want to believe. You in a healthy, affluent neighborhood in the U.S.
In various interviews and public remarks, Gibson has alluded to the existence of hidden structures within elite circles, suggesting in careful but unmistakable terms that certain influential figures may play roles far more complex than what the public sees. While he often stops short of providing verifiable specifics, the implications alone have been enough to spark intense discussion. And among the names that have repeatedly drawn attention is Oprah Winfrey, a figure whose global reputation has long been associated with empowerment, philanthropy, and cultural influence. The contrast between that public image and the nature of these allegations creates a tension that's difficult to ignore, especially when phrased in ways that feel deliberately provocative. Still, it's crucial to recognize that these claims remain unproven, firmly in the realm of speculation and public debate rather than established fact. What gives this situation an added layer of complexity is that the scrutiny surrounding Oprah did not originate from a single voice. Instead, it appears to have developed gradually over time, shaped by a series of associations that critics argue deserve closer examination. Among the most frequently cited is her well-documented connection to Harvey Weinstein, a once dominant figure in Hollywood whose later conviction reshaped conversations across the entire industry. Photographs, shared events, and overlapping social circles have all been revisited through a more critical lens in recent years, prompting some observers to question how closely interconnected these elite networks truly are. And yet, others argue that proximity within powerful circles does not equate to complicity, a distinction that often gets lost as speculation spreads. Then there are the broader discussions, those that extend beyond any single individual and drift into a web of names, documents, and unresolved questions that continue to circulate across independent media spaces.
He sends me a picture of him with his 3-year-old daughter in his back seat. Now, he wasn't trafficking her yet, but over time, most of these traffickers end up trafficking kids.
Trafficking his own daughter?
So many times he end up trafficking their own kids when they get older. Wow. He wasn't trafficking her yet, but what he said, this was so interesting. He said, they sent me a text, and he said, after he had sent me that picture, and I was just appalled, and he said, Pablo, they called me Pablo. He said, Pablo, he said, I'm showing you my picture of her so you know why I'm doing all of this. I want to buy her Ferraris and make all this money for her. He said, I believe that God sent you to me. And what was going through my head is, you're right. God did send me, right? So I can make sure that that child in your backseat never has to go through what these children are that you're trying today.
Did you tell him that?
No, of course I didn't.
Later on? My gosh. What kind of people are these? They got children and they're going to other children, maybe their own?
Well, and
I'll tell you what we would have done with them. I don't know if you know my background.
Oh yeah, I do know your background, and that's what I felt I wanted to do. I was that very first meeting with these guys. I'm sitting there. I've got a Navy SEAL that's standing behind me. He's my real bodyguard and my show bodyguard, right? And he's standing behind me, and one of the leans forward and he goes, Pablo, he said, I have a gift for you. I said, really, what's your gift? This is our very first meeting where we're negotiating this party. I'm telling him, listen, I'm willing to fund your project under one condition. We're going to have a party in about a week. You're going to bring all your existing inventory. If I'm happy with what I see, I'll fund your resort. We had to get him to bring all of their children to one place at one time so we could rescue them.
So did he think you were buying them for your own personal use, whatever you were going to do?
I told him I was giving him $500 per child just for 2 hours in the afternoon with him. That's why I was paying it, right? But really, it was just so that we could get him to call the other truckers, get them to bring all the children together.
That was a scene in the movie.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And so he was so excited I was willing to do that. He says, I have a gift for you. I said, really, what's your gift? And he hands me his phone. And there's a picture of an 11-year-old girl on his phone. He said, this is Princess. She's still a... He said, he started talking about horrific things I could do to this little girl. And I thought, oh my God, I said, if we could help rescue these kids before they're ever trapped in the first place, that would be a miracle. And then something he said made me realize he had more than her. I said, Fuego, I said, you say you just took delivery of some? I said, you have more virgins? He goes, oh yeah, I got 3 or 4 more. I said, you're bringing those to my party too, right? He goes, oh no. He says, they're too expensive. I said, too expensive? I'm already paying this guy $25,000. I'm paying him $500 per child just for that time. I said, he said, Jefe, you already paid $25,000. He said, you want those other virgins? It's going to cost you maybe $2,000, maybe $5,000 for that little one. It's going to cost you maybe $10,000 more. Now at this point, Michael, I am legitimately pissed. No acting involved. He's talking about these children like they're commodities. I've got my really nice suit, $50,000 watch. I put my hands on my chest and I said, you don't think I can afford an extra $10,000? He said, oh no, Jefe, no. I said, I want every one of those virgins at my party. I said, they damn well better be virgins when they get there. They're not for you. They're for me. You understand? He goes, oh yeah, Jefe, I understand. This stupid smile on his face. Now, the Navy SEAL that was behind me cleared his throat and he was I didn't check out the restaurant, make sure everything is safe. Later in debriefing, he said, you know what? He says, that little girl on that phone looked like my daughter at home. He said, I almost unholstered my weapon and shot him right there.
Probably had all to do to hold back.
Yeah. He says, but I knew if I did, he said, we would lose all those other kids.
While Oprah herself has not been formally implicated in any verified wrongdoing, her perceived connections to figures who have faced serious allegations have kept her name within these conversations. The situation becomes even more layered when considering her past association with Jean Teixeira de Faria, widely known as John of God, whose later conviction added another unexpected dimension to the narrative. And perhaps that's what keeps this story from fading, because each connection, each coincidence, and each unanswered question doesn't provide clarity. It simply adds another piece to a puzzle that still doesn't quite form a complete picture. What lingered in the aftermath of those earlier associations wasn't just what had been said, it was what hadn't been addressed. When Oprah Winfrey once introduced Jean Teixeira de Faria, known publicly as John of God, to her audience, the tone was unmistakably admiring, almost reverent, presenting him as a figure of rare spiritual significance. Viewers were encouraged to see him as someone worth traveling across the world to meet, a guide of sorts in a chaotic world. But when his later conviction came to light, the shift was abrupt, and for many watching closely, the absence of a deeply visible, sustained response from Oprah felt less like closure and more like a gap that never fully closed. And in that silence, questions didn't fade, they multiplied, quietly reshaping how some people interpreted everything that came before.
He says, in New York, you might get mugged or, they'll say F you or, whatever. But in Los Angeles, it's kind of like they want to sacrifice you. And I said, whoa, it sort of blew my mind that he said that. I said, what do you mean? He said,
dark, but it's true.
He said, you'll find out if you go there. I'm like, what? It's like such a weird kind of,
I'll be in Central Park, please.
Yeah. And he said it, and he laughed about it when he said, they kind of want to sacrifice you. And I had this notion that he had been there and had been on the chopping block, or, you know, I don't know. It was a weird kind of thing.
When I came over here, I was in my mid-20s.
Right.
The first time I really came over here. You know, I had a whole bunch of weird paranoid suspicions about what the hell was going on, because there was a lot of stuff I couldn't understand.
Right.
And nobody was really bothering to explain it to me.
They don't.
And I formed a bunch of opinions about the town.
If it's not clear here, he's talking about LA, Hollywood.
Yep.
And about the people in it.
Yep.
That were like, surely that couldn't be. Because the whole place can't be like, you know, Weird Town, you know, where the stranger wanders in and all the people are in the bar and they all shut up when he looks at them. And, and they tell you don't go into the house on the hill. And it's like that. And then you go away and you think, no, I was wrong. I mean, that's insane thinking. I'm paranoid. I imagined that stuff. That couldn't be the reason for why so-and-so was acting like, could it? And then you find out later on the track that you were exactly on track with a lot of this stuff. Not specifically on track, but that you could, that some of your worst nightmares were real at the time, and you think,
And you took a couple of years off, which I guess, was that because you didn't want to burn out, or was it because you had something that you wanted to do for a couple of years?
Yeah, well, you get to the place, you're in your 20s, and you're presented with a lot of things and a lot of new games to play and a lot of people and money, and there's a lot of weird power games, and there's the studios over in California and all this kind of stuff, and it gets to be a little bit overwhelming while you try and figure out.
I really want to hear him start speaking about details. Like, in all of the times that we've reacted to Mel Gibson, he always speaks about Hollywood and LA and California in vague terms about how they're doing this and how they want to sacrifice and how they want to, like, he always speaks about it in the vague terms. I want to know what he has actually seen or what he has actually been through.
Trying to make sense of that reaction leads into a much broader, far more complicated reality. How influence tends to operate when it becomes concentrated at the highest levels. Because history has shown time and again that powerful networks don't always function in obvious ways. They move subtly, often protected by layers of loyalty, reputation, and mutual interest. In industries like entertainment, where access is currency and image is everything, those layers can become even harder to untangle. Agreements are signed, narratives are managed, and relationships are maintained in ways that outsiders rarely get to fully see.
I would like you, if you would, to tell us, to the degree that you can, what you were typically dealing with when you started working for the Child Sex Crimes Unit. Let us know what you saw. Let us know what that did to you. Is that sort of thing that changes people's conceptions of humanity per se? Let's say the nature of the cosmos and what it means to be human, right? I mean, when you're in contact with people who are capable of that level of darkness, you start to understand something about the nature of the human soul that you can't understand any other way. And that can be, that's the sort of thing that gives people post-traumatic stress disorder when they're soldiers. So, and now you said also your supervisors had an inkling that you might be protected against that, at least to some degree, because of your faith. So let's walk through what you learned and encountered first. What did you see when you were working as part of this child sex unit?
What I saw was so shocking, Jordan. I thought child sex would be 15-year-olds, 16-year-olds. My brain couldn't comprehend something more evil than abusing that age. The very first case I worked in 2002, I believe, I was given a bunch of VHS videos, some hard drives to look at that had been seized in a warrant. The very first image I saw were there were three little boys that were probably 7, 5, and 3. and they looked like my children. They had, they had blonde hair, blue eyes, and they were being just 3 little boys by this pedophile. And I was so shocked. I fell to my knees. I dry heaved, thinking I was going to throw up into the wastebasket. I jumped into my car. I drove to my children's school, my 3 oldest kids. I checked them out. I still remember in my mind, I can still see dentist appointment I wrote. And I grabbed them, I took them home and just sobbed on the floor. My wife came in and I wouldn't let the kids go, just holding them and shaking. That was my very first experience. You talk about PTSD. I absolutely deal with PTSD to this day. I took too long to actually deal with it. That's another story. And I thought, I can't do this. I can't do this. I started getting help immediately because I didn't want to quit. That's what this is. That's what this is. And those kind of videos have increased over the last couple of years by 5,000%.
Yeah, well, in Canada, we just had a report from an organization called the Western Standard that 1 million child exploitation photos and videos have been identified in an Alberta child porn investigation. 1 million photos, 8 arrests made. Okay, so that's some indication of the widespread nature of the problem. Now, you said that when you first encountered this material, it made you physically ill and also terrified for the safety of your children, but then also it necessitated you seeking help, I suppose, or aid. I mean, I've worked with people who've had post-traumatic stress disorder. Generally, what happens is that tragedy is not enough to give someone post-traumatic stress disorder, even if it's rather severe. It has to be a combination of tragedy and malevolence. And the real trauma comes as a consequence of contact with evil, with malevolence. And what people generally have to do in order to recover from that is to develop a rather profound philosophy of evil. And, a religious faith in its most fundamental essence is a philosophy of good and evil. It does detail out the heart of darkness among human beings. Point out to people, this is particularly, although not uniquely true of the Christian tradition, but particularly true, that capacity for evil lurks in the heart of everyone, and that our fundamental moral obligation as we sojourn here on earth is to overcome that proclivity within and also to stand up against it in the external world. And so you said you received some aid after you had been exposed to this first set of videos. What is it about the way you looked at the world that had to change in order for you to adapt to what you were encountering?
Well, I had to come to grips with an idea that I had never been confronted with before, that there are people, and not a few, but millions of people, only millions of pedophiles could justify a demand of millions of child exploitation material, videos, and so forth. The first person you see arrested in the movie is a real person.
But here's where it becomes unsettling. Because when protection becomes part of the culture, accountability can start to feel optional rather than inevitable. That's why ongoing conversations around widely discussed document releases, often referred to online in vague, almost coded language, continue to hold attention long after headlines fade. These discussions suggest a web of connections between influential figures across politics, finance, and entertainment, raising difficult questions about how proximity, privilege, and access intersect behind closed doors. While many individuals named or associated have never faced legal consequences, the perception of imbalance, of some being held accountable while others remain untouched, has created a sense of unresolved tension.
All of this disgusting stuff, as far as I'm concerned, with minors, and get away with it. Nobody investigating them, nobody looking at it. Is that because people in power keep everybody else away? Is that the bottom line?
Well, here's the sad thing, Michael, is this is more pervasive than people, this meaning doing things with minors, right, is more pervasive than any of us want to believe. You in a healthy, affluent neighborhood in the US, you walk out in your front porch and you look left and you look right. there's a very high chance that one of those homes on your block is a dangerous place for children.
Really?
There's of all the women who are listening to us today, over 40% of them have admitted that they are a victim at some time in their life of 1/4 of them, it was as a child. So 25% of all the women you know, and that's just the ones that talk about it. Now with men, it's a little bit less. It's 1 in every 5 at some time in our life. But even then, 1/4 of them, it was under the age of 10 years old in their own homes. This is pervasive. And there are so many people involved that there's too many judges, there's too many prosecutors that have dirt on them as well, that they don't want to be pushed into a position where that can be brought to light. And so yes, it's happening everywhere.
And even when no direct evidence ties certain individuals to wrongdoing, the persistence of these conversations reveals something deeper, a growing discomfort with how little the public truly understands about these circles. Within that context, Mel Gibson's remarks take on a different tone, not as isolated accusations, but as part of a larger narrative he appears to be pointing toward. He hasn't framed his claims as direct evidence of personal criminal acts, but rather as suggestions of involvement within a system where influence can shield, enable, or quietly redirect scrutiny. Whether those suggestions hold any truth is not something speculation alone can determine, but the ethical question they raise is harder to dismiss. Because if even a fraction of these dynamics were real, it would challenge not just individuals, but the structure of trust itself. And maybe that's why the conversation refuses to disappear. It isn't just about who might be involved, but about whether the system itself allows certain truths to remain just out of reach. Then there's the reaction to Sound of Freedom, which seemed to ignite something far beyond typical film criticism. On the surface, it presented a narrative centered on rescuing vulnerable children, something that would typically unify audiences rather than divide them. And yet, the response fractured almost immediately, with sharp contrast between grassroots support and institutional skepticism. Some critiques focused on Tim Ballard and later controversy surrounding his organization, Operation Underground Railroad, points that on their own warrant scrutiny. But much of the discourse seemed to drift away from those specifics, shifting instead toward the people watching the film, questioning their motives, their judgment, even their character. And that shift, away from the message and toward the audience, left an impression that for many felt far more revealing than the criticism itself. What made the reaction feel so jarring wasn't just disagreement, it was the tone, the sharpness. The way a film centered on protecting vulnerable children seemed to provoke something far more personal than ordinary critique. Even in an industry known for strong opinions, that level of hostility stood out, almost as if the conversation had shifted from analysis into something more emotionally charged. One interpretation suggested some critics genuinely believed the film overstated certain realities, that it simplified a deeply complex issue into something more dramatic than accurate. But another perspective has quietly taken hold among viewers, one that wonders whether the discomfort came from somewhere deeper, somewhere less easy to explain. And once that possibility enters the conversation, it becomes difficult to fully ignore. Because when influential voices respond with mockery instead of measured discussion, it naturally raises a question that lingers longer than any headline. What exactly is being reacted to here? The role of mainstream media in shaping that reaction cannot be overlooked, as it often determines which narratives gain legitimacy and which are pushed to the margins. Over time, stories involving powerful figures and sensitive allegations have sometimes been framed in ways that discourage serious consideration, at least until undeniable evidence forces a shift. And by then, something subtle but significant has already happened. The public has been conditioned to hesitate, to doubt, to look away just long enough for clarity to slip through their fingers. That pattern, whether intentional or not, leaves behind an unsettling implication about how influence can shape perception itself. There's also a historical echo that adds weight to all of this. There have been moments when individuals tied to widely discussed controversies were initially dismissed as fringe topics, only for later developments to bring a very different kind of attention. By the time those shifts occur, however, the cultural momentum has often already been set, making it harder to separate truth from the layers of prior skepticism. Some observers believe that this dynamic creates a kind of protective buffer, not necessarily through direct concealment, but through narrative fatigue, where people stop paying attention before the full picture emerges. And if that's even partially true, it suggests something far more complex than simple disagreement. It hints at a system where timing and perception can be just as powerful as facts themselves. Within that atmosphere, accounts like those shared by Piers Morgan about his 2011 visit to Mel Gibson's Malibu home take on a different kind of significance, not as proof of anything concrete, but as a glimpse into a state of mind. The image of a once dominant Hollywood figure living in relative isolation, carrying a visible sense of unease despite immense success, invites interpretation. Was it simply the aftermath of public controversy, or something more internal, more difficult to articulate? That ambiguity is what keeps people speculating, because it suggests there may be layers to the story that haven't been fully understood. And sometimes it's not what is said outright that captures attention. It's what seems to sit just beneath the surface, unresolved.
But beyond all the speculation, all the competing narratives and unanswered questions, one issue remains grounded and undeniable: the need for genuine accountability. Not the kind shaped by public opinion or media cycles, but one rooted in consistent investigation, transparency, and equal application of the law, regardless of status or influence. It's easy for conversations like this to drift into extremes, where everything is either believed without question or dismissed entirely. What's far more difficult and far more necessary is creating a system where claims are examined carefully, evidence is pursued without bias, and outcomes are determined by truth rather than power. Because in the end, the real question isn't just what people are saying, it's whether any system in place is truly capable of handling the answers, wherever they might lead. In recent years, something has shifted, quietly at first, then all at once, as cases once dismissed or ignored began to reach courtrooms, leading to convictions that many once believed would never happen. Those outcomes proved a powerful point. Influence and status, while formidable, are not always enough to outrun evidence when it is pursued relentlessly. But with each conviction came a deeper, more unsettling thought. If some individuals were held accountable, how many others, connected in ways less visible, simply faded back into the background? That question doesn't come with easy answers, and maybe that's exactly why it continues to echo. Because every resolved case seems to open the door to several more that were never fully explored, leaving behind a sense that the surface has only just been scratched. For Oprah Winfrey, the conversation exists in a different space, not one of legal accusation, but of public expectation. She has not been charged with any crime, and that distinction matters. Yet, for many observers, the focus is shifted towards something less tangible but equally significant: responsibility that comes with influence. When a figure builds a legacy around advocacy, empowerment, and protection of the vulnerable, people begin to expect a level of openness that goes beyond legal obligation. And when questions arise, fair or unfair, the absence of a clear, direct response can feel louder than any statement. It creates a vacuum, and in that vacuum, speculation doesn't just grow, it accelerates. What we're witnessing, at its core, feels less like a single controversy and more like a broader moment of reflection, a slow unraveling of how power has operated behind the scenes for decades. Because this isn't just about individuals, it's about systems, about environments where proximity, access, and silence can intersect in ways that are difficult to trace but impossible to fully dismiss. Films like Sound of Freedom don't just tell a story, they force conversations into spaces where they might not have been welcomed before. And when a narrative centered on protecting children becomes deeply polarizing, it leaves behind an uncomfortable implication that something within the cultural response itself may be worth examining more closely. Mel Gibson, as a figure within this narrative, adds another layer of complexity. His past is undeniably controversial, and for many, that alone shapes how his words are received. But others argue that the value of a question isn't determined solely by who asks it. It's determined by whether it leads to something worth examining. And that's where the tension sits, unresolved. Because the questions being raised about awareness, about connections, about who remained silent and why, don't disappear simply because they are uncomfortable. If anything, discomfort is often what keeps them alive. And so, the story doesn't end with conclusions. It lingers in uncertainty. It circles back to a single persistent thought. When someone holds immense influence, resources, and the trust of millions, what does it mean when they choose not to address certain narratives directly? Is silence simply restraint, or does it carry its own kind of message? That ambiguity is what leaves people watching, listening, and wondering, because sometimes what isn't said becomes the most difficult to ignore. Comment below with what you think is really going on. Leave a like if this gave you chills, and subscribe, plus turn on notifications if you want to see more Hollywood secrets.